Today, we're diving straight into a totally fascinating 19th century French philosophical text. It explores the psychological toll of wage labor and the whole systemic architecture of control. Basically, we're going to look at how people navigated a world that demanded literally everything from their bodies, while at the same time trying to crush their spirits. But it's not all doom and gloom, because we'll also see how a few ingenious individuals found some pretty radical ways to fight back. On the fifth day, we got the sinister message: nothing more to do except die. I mean, wow. Think about the absolute weight of those words for a second. This immediately establishes the sheer, literal life or death stakes of the 19th century working class. This wasn't just about losing a paycheck. It was about the immediate, terrifying proximity of total ruin. Okay, let's dive into this. The text sets up this core duality, the sufferings of the soul versus the sufferings of the body. And honestly, it outlines a reality that might feel eerily familiar to a lot of modern gig workers. You have the intense mental agony and anxiety of waiting for work, wandering the streets, practically begging for a task. And then, on the flip side, you have the physical erosion and breakdown of your body when you actually get the job. Both are completely debilitating, but they attack you in entirely different ways. Section 1. The Trap of Wage Labor. The Agony of Waiting. Taking a descent into the hellish reality of the piecework printer in Paris, their plight reveals this incredibly cruel paradox. A day at work was not necessarily a day of work. Masters would hire these typesetters and effectively lock them in the print shop all day. But here's the catch. Because they were paid piecework, they only earn money if contingency work actually arrived. So they're physically trapped, forbidden to leave, yet completely unpaid for their forced presence unless a job miraculously materialized. The text captures this agonizing feeling with such a visceral metaphor. A life begged from God minute by minute. The sheer unpredictability of piecework acted as this slow divestment of reality for the worker. It wasn't just hunger. It was the erosion of your very being by nothingness. Just waiting in a silent shop, totally dependent on the whims of the master and the market. Section 2. The proletarian of thought. The double life and burnout. And this brilliantly illustrates the tragedy of the intellectual worker. This is the person desperately trying to balance physical survival during the day with intense mental ambition at night. These individuals faced an impossible tension. By day, the laborer is completely bound to the master's clock, resulting in total physical exhaustion. Then by night, the encyclopedist or poet desperately chases fleeting inspiration, but faces complete mental destitution. Trying to walk in both worlds simultaneously, well, it drove many worker poets to fatal burnout, despair, the hospital, or tragically, straight to the river. The text actually makes a really fascinating point here. The ultimate enemy wasn't just starvation, it was the cancer of boredom, this mutual numbness of both body and soul. The mechanical, soul-crushing repetition of the workday threatened to destroy the workers' spirit so thoroughly that even when they did have free time, their minds were just too exhausted to produce the art or philosophy they craved. It's a pretty intense historical parallel to the modern burnout we see today when people try to juggle survives jobs with creative passions. Section 3. Hacking time and space. The floor layers pivot. This brings us to a really fascinating figure named Gauni. He was a floor layer who figured out a radical way to hack this 19th century capitalist system. Gauni's method is an absolute inversion of time. It's kind of like a 19th century life hack that feels a bit like extreme quiet quitting, but weaponized for personal freedom. Step 1, he escapes the master's gaze by taking on piecework in empty, unfinished houses. No boss breathing down his neck. Step 2, he accelerates his physical output, throwing himself into the work in an absolute frenzy to devour the task. And step 3, he does all this to reclaim that stolen time for philosophical thought and total mental liberty. He literally uses his own physical exertion to buy back his time. He mortifies his body to give flight to his soul. Now, make no mistake, this was not a comfortable lifestyle. It was a highly purposeful asceticism. He was living like a monk in the desert. He voluntarily traded immense physical hardship, literally crawling on his hands and knees all day to lay floorboards, in exchange for absolute, untouchable mental independence. Section 4. The Cenobitic Economy, the science of the rebel budget. So you might be wondering, how did he afford to live like this? So the crucial point is the Cenobitic economy. It's defined as the science of severely restricting one's needs to purchase the maximum amount of liberty. Simply put, the less you need to consume, the less you need to work for a master. The text frames this as a brilliant 19th century precursor to what we might recognize today as the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, or modern anti-consumerism. Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is this strangely specific metric. Exactly 7% of the rebels' budget is strictly allocated to footwear. Why? Because true independence requires constant walking. You can't just sit at home. You have to be out in the world, hustling to secure your own micro-contracts and moving constantly to maintain your freedom completely outside the traditional factory walls. Because, as the text metaphorically puts it, rivers are roads. The free worker must endlessly walk the city to find gaps in the system. This rebel's journey is essentially a massive hunting game. They are traversing all of Paris, negotiating with seedy intermediaries and cabarets, mapping out the entire city, and deliberately avoiding the traps of traditional daytime employment. Section 5. The Cellular Prison, the Architecture of Control. So what happens when the system adapts to these rebels? Well, we move from individual rebellion to the dark, systemic climax of the source material. The text zeroes in on the panopticon. These were the truly chilling architectural innovations of the 1830s model prisons. They were specifically designed to be a world without fissures, constructed to strip inmates of any shadows, any secrets, and literally any chance to communicate. They were built to cage not just the body, but to completely isolate and break the mind. Listen to this striking observation from the text. One sense is there that tidiness and regularity are deadly. The prison weaponized its very air intakes and utilized flawless stonework to bury the human voice. It was methodically designed to stifle all sound and connection, creating this horrific sensory deprivation chamber that tortured the soul without ever actually laying a finger on the physical body. And then there is the absolute terror of the eye of the door, a blind yet seeing gaze that constantly pries into the cell. Combined with an eternal gaslight that was kept burning all night long, it essentially replaced the factory master's daytime gaze with a 24-hour cycle of relentless surveillance. The psychological impact of never knowing exactly when you're being watched, it's profound. And honestly, it's terrifying. Section 6. The Spark of Rebellion, the Unthinking Builders. Bridging the gap between the nightmare of the cellular prison and the very workers who physically constructed it, the text asks a highly provocative question. Why do workers build the tombs for their brothers? It forces us to take a hard look at the systemic complicity of the working class in their own subjugation. Think about it. The prison could not exist without the meticulous labor of the exact people who might one day find themselves locked inside it. The text argues that the builders are acting as unconscious machine men. They are working like beasts solely to earn a wage, blindly piling stone on stone without ever critically examining what the building is actually for. By perfectly executing the architect's plans, they are essentially perfecting the impossibilities of escape against themselves. They completely separate their labor from the moral reality of the structure they are actively creating. Let's move on and see how this builds directly into the concepts of Babel and Moloch. Without the meticulous, unthinking skill of the workers, the tyrant's plans would just collapse into a misshapen ruin. The entire architecture of control is a tottering edifice that only stands because of unthinking obedience. If the architects had to build it themselves, actually, scratch that. If they even had to lay a single stone, the whole thing would fall apart. Which leaves us with a final, incredibly powerful question. What happens when the machine men finally stop building the prison? It's a lingering thought about the ultimate power we hold when we simply refuse to participate in the systems that trap us.